No, but here's the thing. This is important, though. That's a really good example to bring up. So this is what Muller, in his book, concludes. Measurement is not an alternative to judgment. Measurement demands judgment. Judgment about whether to measure, what to measure, and how to evaluate the significance of what's being measured, whether rewards and penalties will be attached to the results, and to whom to make the measurements available. So what does he mean by that? In the example you've just presented, okay, say your church attendance is going down. That's a quantifiable measurement that's going down.
Yeah.
And you might be thinking, we must be doing something wrong. Well, no, pause. You might not be doing anything quote-unquote wrong. You need to make judgment upon the measurement. How do you get judgment? It's by actually being in the community, but also being in the world at the same time. So let's use this example. If you were to tell the Orthodox Church, Greek Orthodox, or the Catholic Church, over the past 60 years since Vatican II, actually the reason why so many people are leaving church, and see the numbers, they're just going down and to the right. This is not good. They're leaving church because it's because you're not relevant. You know, the whole hippie movement happened, and you're just so out of touch with reality. No one can understand the Mass at all anymore, so you need to make a change. What's happening now is it's going up and to the right, their attendance. And it's probably not because of Vatican II. Actually, there are a large number of young people who prefer Latin Mass pre-Vatican II Mass.
I know.
So you might be thinking, things are obviously not going right because we're shrinking or we're losing people.
Yeah.
If you were to truly just take a qualitative measurement approach to that, you'd be thinking, well, we must be doing something wrong. But there's more to it than that. See, judgment is always primary over measurement.
Clever am I, clever to have climbed so high. It's nothing short of madness, considering the menace of the sky. It's a lie, one at first you tell inside. It's automatic to me, born so naturally in the mind.
Kia ora koutou, welcome to Lunch on the Way. I'm Joey, and today Graeme and I talk about metrics, and not just a flat conversation. This is a dynamic conversation about why our world and our culture and even our churches are obsessed with measuring things, that we need to somehow turn everything into a number to see how it's actually being beneficial for us. And what we kind of conclude is that you can't really measure everything. Some things are immeasurable, like our relationships, like love, like joy, like happiness. You can't measure those things, but we have an intuitive sense of how we are tracking and how things are just by being embodied in the world. So we address that question here today. And as always, if you find this conversation helpful in any way and you want more people to learn about it, instead of sharing it, which you can certainly do, you can rate or review this podcast on whatever podcasting platform you use, or you can like and comment on YouTube if that's how you're watching this conversation, because it just helps the algorithm know that we exist, and that will go a long way. Also, the music you're listening to right now, and you've been listening to for the past number of episodes, is by my friend Josiah David Swim. You can find him on Spotify as Josiah David Swim. He is a phenomenal musician. I love his music, and if you're enjoying this right now, then I would encourage you to listen to his music on Spotify. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Heavily hearted and lonesome.
Pukekohe, yeah.
It's cheap. It's 600.
Yeah?
600 or something.
Yeah.
It's a big church.
Did you read that article that was shared of the Bible Society's
No, what's that?
UK study that they've done?
No.
So this is what's crazy, and this is why, so for example, they released a study, and they've mentioned how they've looked at a gap between 2021 and 2025 for church attendance in the UK.
Yeah.
And, the narrative for the past 20, 30 years is longer in the UK, but certainly here has been decline. And the demographics that you would expect would be the lowest are, young people, mostly male, or is probably the least likely to attend church probably for a couple decades now. Well, in the UK, the Bible Society has found out that actually it's completely flipped, and church attendance is on the rise in the UK. Not just by a little bit, by like a considerable percentage. I don't know the exact percentage, but it's enough to be like,
Wow.
okay, gosh, we went from, I think, like 9% to 15% over 5 years. That might not be exact, but it's at least a 6% increase, which is not nothing in a population of 65 million people plus.
No.
So the craziest stat, though, was 18 to 24-year-olds is the largest demographic who attend church.
Really?
In the UK. And of those, and so both men and women have seen an increase over the past 5 years.
Yeah.
But of those, men have seen the largest jump between the age of 18 and 25.
Gosh.
And so I think it went from something silly like 4%, like out of the population attended church once a month, to I think it's upwards of 22 or 21% of all 18 to 24-year-old males attend church once a month.
Wow.
Self-reporting, but that's insane jump. And so supposedly they haven't done a study like this in New Zealand yet, or they haven't done a study like this in Australia yet. But even before COVID, the trends in both of our countries, or at least Australia, was going up. It wasn't in a state of decline.
Right.
And so what they're anticipating, people who do these stats for churches, is that, okay, so the UK in a positive way is a canary in the coal mine kind of moment. And they titled the study The Quiet Revival.
Oh, okay.
Because like when you see a percentage jump like that in attendance, you're like, well, why don't I notice it? Why am I not seeing it? Like, shouldn't I be seeing it everywhere? It's like, no. When it looks big comparatively to what it was, but what that might anecdotally look like within your local congregation is, I'm just going to use men as the demographic of that age group, men just continuing to go to church in that age bracket, as opposed to stopping attending church, which is what they have done over the decades. And it also might look like this one or two young adult people, whether male or female, attending your church, which of a 200-person church. Which you might be like, oh yeah, I know one person or two people, but you bear that out across all churches, statistically speaking, that's when you do see the jump. Yeah. Have you noticed any, like, I know within the church you attend, have you noticed anything?
Well, I mean, every Sunday they have people making commitments.
Yeah.
It's every Sunday.
Every Sunday, and that's run for forever, right?
Yeah, well, it's like, 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Every Sunday.
Yeah.
Which in our churches is pretty, nothing.
Yeah.
But
most churches don't give an invitation every single Sunday.
Well, yeah, well, that's right.
Yeah.
These guys do. That's part of the liturgy.
Yeah.
Every Sunday, without miss.
Yeah.
Same parroted line, same process. Give me a hand. Put down your hand. And it's first invitation. If you prayed, look, I just need to see your hand. That you've, if you've made that decision, just show me your hand. Then it's hit the connect card, and that's how they follow them up. Yeah,
but for somebody who's been attending church for a long time, you're like, okay, this again. But for somebody who is there,
that's right.
Time, I think meaningful.
Yeah, that's what I think. I mean, I don't necessarily think it's wrong. I find it hard as a pastor every week, particularly if you're familiar to a smaller congregation, because you're saying it to the same people every week.
You do, so it's almost like
it's hard because you just feel like I'm parroting.
Yeah,
but I guess it works in the city, in the bigger church. So on a Sunday morning, there's 2 services. Probably the one I was in this day was about 150, probably 250 the next service, but it's rather more full. Yeah. So, I mean, that's, you multiply that out, these churches, these Elam churches, they're probably doing quite well.
Yeah. And so supposedly the denominations that are mostly seeing a lot of the growth is around Eastern Orthodox, Catholic, a little bit of Anglican, but obviously in Pentecostal.
Yeah.
And so this guy, Justin Briley, who does the podcast, The Surprising Rebirth of God, where he outlines the rise of the new atheism in the early 2000s, and it's declined within a decade of itself.
Yeah.
And then the rise of this meaning crisis where people are looking for God again, which is what we're in right now.
Yeah.
What he concludes in his book and his podcast is actually what makes those churches attractive is actually how weird they are.
Yeah, well, and that's interesting, isn't it? It's that whole kind of counterintuitive environment
Yeah.
becomes attractive, which I think underneath has that sense of transcendence.
Yeah.
People are looking for something greater than themselves. What's the meaning of life? Just the tyranny of the tyranny of having to earn a living, pay a mortgage.
Yeah.
Just the constant, In fact, I've talked to my brother-in-law a little bit about this, but then somebody on Sunday I said, how are you going? He said, we've closed the warehouse in Hamilton, so he's a logistics manager for a company,
Yeah.
And
the
I
warehouse
said,
group, like a warehouse.
Yeah. Well,
store.
sort of, yeah. They sort of service hygiene stuff for the hospitals and stuff,
So it's just a warehouse.
Yeah.
Okay. Never mind.
And I said, what's that? And he said, well, it's just, efficiencies, looking for better efficiencies. And he said, basically means less people, more work.
Yeah. That's
so that he wasn't bemoaning that, but that's what it is. I've got to work harder for less, and it's never enough.
Yeah.
And how much more do I have to do?
Yeah.
And that's the tyranny of. Yeah. It's really a little bit the tyranny of the age.
Yeah.
And I suspect in the, for the emerging, so the millennials like you, kind of, well, this is our lot at the moment.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure the ones that are the Zoomers are going to buy that.
Well, exactly.
Because the millennials are sort of like, we didn't really want this. So my daughter would be a kind of classic of that. I didn't want to have a mortgage and have to be caught in it, and now I am.
Yeah.
Now we are.
Yeah.
They didn't want that.
No.
Mind you, I don't think we ever wanted it either. But there is that sort of have a family. I'm now into that life, and as that kind of compounds. Because it was there with the millennials. It was there for you guys, wasn't it?
What's this?
The sort of sense of I guess that sort of overarching tyranny of work, pay for a mortgage, the things they have, and it just repeats. Now there is something about life that is about like that, but if life has that sort of regularity and monotony to it, I think the sustaining person, and that's where faith kicks in, because it has bigger meaning than just this is it. And that's maybe the thing about looking for sort of transcendence. I'm looking for something that's beyond just this, the mundane nature of life.
Yeah, I think when, like, for my generation, I'm at the younger end of millennial now, is the lifestyle vlogger on YouTube who traveled and just kind of curated their life and made it look incredibly sought after. This term called wanderlust became a thing in my generation. So basically, I'm in the job now. I'm a young 20-something-year-old. I really just want to go out and just travel the world, experience the world, and get away from the monotony, have a different day every day. I think that really is kind of the millennial pull. And you could very much do that, to be honest, in the 2010s.
Yeah, you could
do that. Traveling was cheap. I remember going to New Zealand from Canada, or opposite, going from New Zealand, to Canada. That's what I meant. We found a ticket for Lauren and I. One ticket cost us about, I think, $1,800 round trip, which is 3 flights across the world, and that was incredibly cheap at the time. And because prior to that, the best we could see was like $2,200, $2,400. So we bought it up in 2019 as quickly as we possibly could. Yeah. And we bought it on our phones, which was just crazy. But we did usually do those purchases on a laptop. We just bought it right on the phone. And then now it costs, like, the best prices I'm seeing at the moment are like $3,000 round trip. Yeah. And so there was definitely a world in which you could do that. I remember going to I think my wife and I and another couple were just downtown hanging out in Halifax, the city I grew up in the summertime. It was a Halifax free day or something, where a lot of public attractions were free. Yeah. And you could just go, and we went to Citadel Hill. And what I thought was interesting was there was a protest going on downtown at the parade square out front of City Hall. And it was a bunch of like 16, 15-year-old kids. Yeah. I think I was 24, 25 at the time. So almost a decade younger than me, protesting about climate change and about how the government needs to get their act together. Everyone else needs to do something because the world's going to hell, basically. It's going to burn up and we're all going to die. And I remember thinking to myself, well, 2 things. One, I'm like, not to get political or anything, but the conversation is more nuanced than one-sided for sure. So it's interesting that this is allowed by teachers, like the school allows kids to leave school for this. Interesting. But the second thought I had was, we're going to have a lot of kids when they finish high school who are going to be very depressed, not clinically, but just really sad about the future.
Yeah.
Maybe clinically as well, who don't have a lot of hope, see their parents and people who are older than their parents as incompetent because they've put us into this mess, whatever mess you think that is, whether it's real or not, who cares? That's what they believe is the case. And so where do you turn to when you realize politics isn't your hope anymore? Even local activism isn't your hope anymore. What do you do? Because you can't turn nihilistically, or else then there's no point in living, which I'm sure some people think and do. Yeah. So what do you do? And so a part of me is like, I am not surprised at all that there are the largest demographic.
It does make sense.
People going to church.
Yeah. You've also got, your Jordan Peterson phenomena. Yeah. You've got your Tom Holland. You've got the sort of academic, sort of intellectual elites. Yeah. That have sort of opened up the space.
Yeah, they're re-justifying Christianity.
Yeah, just saying, look, it's not. We shouldn't sort of push it. So the new atheism's died.
Oh, it's dead.
It's just amazing how quickly it died.
It's done because you couldn't build a life on it.
Yeah.
It was the new atheism and saying that God didn't exist, do what you want, was arising as people's existential dread about the future because of climate change was rising as well. Yeah. And both aren't compatible. Yeah. Unless you have 100% faith in politics, then maybe. But we learned very quickly in the 2010s, especially through Trump's election, and even very recent elections with Carney in Canada and another Labour Party in Albanese in Australia, you're not going to get what you want. The electorate's actually very split down the middle, minority governments all around, and so you can't get much done. There's not enough political will to actually have any radical change for whatever thing you want changed. Yeah. So your faith in politics is just diminished. So where do you put your faith?
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, I was thinking about the Trump thing. I mean, that in one sense is the frustration with the system it's stuck. Yeah. And then you get this sort of Trumpism comes through, and so it then sort of acts sort of unilaterally. It's sort of, it just runs over the top of what we would have called democratic processes. Yeah. And you can sort of see the logic there, can't you? In the sense that we can't get anything done. Yeah. And in China, it has a system where it just, I don't agree with it, but just runs over people.
Well, yeah, certainly the human rights aspect of it. Yeah,
yeah. So, but they get things done.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing.
So it's that's democracy is in one sense quite weak. But American could you call it a real democracy?
I don't think so.
It's like
no, because each state is sovereign in the American system, right? Yeah, and so that's the big difference between most countries is it's in the state you are voting for who you think should be president, and then whoever wins gets more than 50% of the votes. Then the state then sends their electoral votes to Washington, right, to then vote. So you're not voting for the president in the country as much as you're voting for the president in your state, that then votes for the president in the country. So it's like it's one step removed. I see it as.
Oh, so that happens. So you would vote in the state for what you want. Yeah. Republican or a Democrat president. Yeah. And that state has so many electoral votes that so the decision of like if it's blue or red. Yeah. Okay. Say Iowa. Oh, we're going blue, or we're going to go red. Yeah. That's it.
Well, because
which contributes to electoral.
If they went 50, let's just say, I don't know how many votes California has, but let's just say they have 40 votes, and say 52% of people vote Democrat in California. Well, they get 100% of the electoral votes, all 40 votes.
Oh, right. Okay. Right? Sort of one past the post in a small way.
It's not past. Well, it is kind of, but not really, because in our parliamentary system, at least in Canada, like Nova Scotia, for example, is divided up into, I think, 13, maybe less, maybe about 13 MPs or electorates. Yeah. And so you don't win the whole province, and then that goes towards one party. It's a plurality. And so I think there were 3 conservative votes, and then the rest were liberal.
Yeah, so those are represented in
then it's represented federally. So it's actually a bit more democratic, I think, than the U.S. in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but I want to shift to
Yep.
metrics really
Right.
quick. So, Graeme, this is we always devolve into politics, I find.
Yeah, I know.
But we started with talking about how there's a growth and measured growth within the church, which is phenomenal, very welcome for whatever reason. I think it's always welcome, whether people are going to church for maybe not the greatest reasons, or whether they are for great reasons. Because I remember, what is it? I think Paul in one of his epistles basically said, you know what, there's some people who preach Christ with horrible motives because they think they're doing us a disservice, but I actually praise God that Christ is being preached still.
Yeah.
So mixed motives is okay. But with that being said, how do we actually measure things in church? Because I know that we always like to get a sense of what's actually happening and what is the pulse of what's going on. How do I know things are going well within whatever we're doing? And so what is our experience been, or what your experience been so far?
Well, generally I think that we measure by what we see.
Yeah.
So what we see is then very material in one sense.
Yeah.
So it's, we see a chair, we see the numbers of people in church. So that's sort of default thing, and I think in a culture where we're really primed by our visual sense, then that becomes the measuring stick. So, but your question is, what can we, I mean, a quick question is, what is a healthy church? Well, CFCL has just released 10 characteristics.
Church leadership.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not exhaustive. But if I was to go to a church, I mean, these are very subjective. You want a loving community. Mm-hmm. So how would you know that there was a loving community, or a community that was hospitable and friendly? And I obviously go, well, watch how many people stay behind the service.
Yeah.
Have a look at the building. What are the flows where people are? Is there a kind of gathering? Is there a really good gathering space? So that goes into church designing buildings.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah. So is there a space where people can linger?
Yeah.
What's the lingering time?
Yeah. How do you measure that? Is this like, what you want 5 minutes? Do you want 10 minutes?
Yeah.
It's like, well, okay, I think we're missing the point a little bit.
Yeah. So you judge it. I mean, sometimes when I was pastoring, I'd get home sort of about, church would finish at 11:30. It'd be about 1:00, 1:30 by the time I got home.
Yeah.
But why? Because the sort of people lingering at church, and generally the pastor's the last person to go.
But even within that lingering thing, you have people who have young families who just need to feed their kids quickly.
Yeah, that's right.
So they've got to go quick, or else their kids are going to melt down.
That's right. So you can't put it all there.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of... I guess in one way of describing this, there are, for a church, the formal aspects of it are easy to measure.
Yeah.
So your institutional elements.
Yeah, like...
How many home groups have you got? That's generally where it's gone.
Yeah.
How many home groups? How many people attend?
Giving.
What's the giving like? What's the numbers on Sunday morning like?
How many people are getting baptized?
Yeah, how many... Yeah, so it's...
How many kids are in the kids' ministry versus in the general attendance?
Yeah. So it's kind of very institutional, organisational. It's, the kind of metrics around that. But how do you measure the informal?
Yeah.
The informal is kind of the relationships. Do people stop and talk to each other? What's the kind of generosity towards each other? How are people forgiving each other? Mm-hmm. What are the stories in the congregation? Are there stories bubbling up? Is there sort of a freedom? What's the level of spontaneity and sort of creativity like in a church? And they're things never talked about.
No.
Or very seldom.
Well, it's very difficult to measure them.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yet, I'd say that you have to have both those.
Yeah.
You have to have the formal and you have to have the informal. And there've got to be some relationship between those working together.
Yeah.
If there's a incongruence to it, then I think there's a problem. So too much informal, there's no shape. It's wobbly. It's like it just goes this way and that. So it's, it could just all disappear and evaporate. So you need institution, organisation. You need all those sort of things. So, but I think we do tend to sort of push on.
Well, we lean towards things that we can actually reliably measure.
Yeah.
Because it's like you lean towards things you can control.
Yeah.
Right? And you can see.
Yeah.
I do remember in our conversation with Andrew Root, and I think in our last episode, I was in our debrief episode,
Yeah.
I was a bit too heavy-handed, I think, in what I said around, well, churches shouldn't be about growth. I think I did listen back to his episode.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's what I was saying, but I was definitely pushing in that direction.
Yeah.
When I listened back to what Andrew Root said, he's like, no, there is something important about growth within the Christian story.
Yeah.
But what he said was really important. He said it's not growth into something. Like, imagine like this platonic sense of being, like a perfect state of who you are, the ideal form of yourself.
Yeah.
It's not growth into that. It's growth into Christ, is what he said.
Yeah.
And what I thought was interesting about that, and it's easy to misunderstand what he said, what he means is you are growing in, not into as in like more Christ-like. That wasn't the emphasis, because that's the former.
Yeah.
The latter, growing in him, is you are growing, you are if Christ is like 100 meters away from you, how close are you to him? Or if, this is another horrible metaphor, if he is like 10 feet suspended above you, and you can physically grow or reach up, how close are you to him? That's not a good metaphor. But that's the kind of thing. It's not a growth into becoming. It's a growth in proximity to, almost kind of thing I think he was talking about. And so I wanted to make that clarification.
So how would you describe that? I mean, that's very abstract.
Yeah, it is abstract.
So how would you describe that in terms of church? What would in the life of a congregation, what would that look like?
Well, another abstract, I think it has a lot to do with being.
Yes.
And I don't mean, I do mean maybe ontologically, but like stative sense of, and practically speaking, it's like how often, and this is where we get to the measurements, so we always go back to the measurements somehow. Like, are you in the liturgy of the church? Are you participating in the liturgy that kind of houses the presence of Christ within it? Not exclusively, but certainly it is one way in which that happens.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Are you taking communion?
Yeah.
Are you praying?
Yeah.
And it's those things.
And you might tell a little bit by, I mean, that did pop out of these 10 characteristics. But I think there's a lot of work to ask the question as a talking point. And one was healthy characteristics. By vaguely, this is not particularly how it was expressed, but the inference was about the importance of story. So, how are people telling their stories? Is there a place to tell stories? Mm-hmm. What about the congregational story? I mean, because there's lots of little stories, but what's that? How does that rooted into the story of the congregation?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot you could do in that space.
Yeah.
An awful lot. So the stories will give, which is another word for testimony, really.
It is.
But if we use the word testimony, we sort of get caught in a sort of, in the boomer kind of thing and giving you testimony. And we're not talking about that. We're talking about telling our stories. Where are we meeting God in the rupture of life, in the difficulty of life?
Yeah.
Where I could ask you, where are you meeting? Like you said to me, I haven't had much sleep because of because of
busyness of life and kid not sleeping.
Yeah, not sleeping. So you would say, well, that's pretty ordinary, but it might be the question: were you meeting Christ in that? And that might be a story that's expressed, and I don't know.
It could be like this. It could be like, I feel this is true. I feel my most spiritually drained and distant when I am my most tired. Yeah. That is something true about me.
Yeah.
However, a story within that you can't really measure at all is, even when I don't feel like I'm close to God, even when I don't feel like I'm growing into Christ in the sense of proximity and being with him, I still, take these moments in the morning to pray, even though I'm just like, I just feel so dead. Yeah.
And for somebody you telling that story, whether, and again, that may be the question, where in a church community are those spaces? Yeah. Are they given air?
Yeah.
Do they breathe? I would say, well, people would say, oh, that's what you do in the home group. And I'm going, yeah, but maybe how does the congregation, hear that?
Yeah.
And I think there are ways in which you could explore that.
Yeah, because we both read a book. Did you read the book yet?
Yeah, the metrics one.
Yeah, so we read this book by, what's the guy's name? I got it here because I did a summary of it.
Yeah, I can't remember his name.
His name is Jerry Muller, and he wrote a book called The Tyranny of Metrics. And so it's and he's more of in the business, governmental, organizational space, not in the church space.
Yeah.
But a lot of it, I think, can be applied. And so what his big thesis is what we measure is what we focus on. And so typically the things that are easiest to measure are the things we tend to put our focus on. However, just because things are easy to measure doesn't mean that the measurable things are the most important things.
No.
And also there's a sense in which, so he uses the examples of in companies of how CEOs of large organizations, they feel like they can't trust people's judgment below them or on the ground. And so what they need is they want the raw numbers. Give me the numbers. Give me the facts so I can make an informed decision. But what he says is whenever you're dealing with numbers that involve people, you need to take them with a grain of salt because it depends on your methodology. It depends on how you're collecting the data and even the questions you're asking or even what you're looking for that will determine the outcome a lot of the time. And so what he says, what he advocates for is the more human the thing you're measuring or the more alive the thing you're measuring, the less you really should rely on quantitative measurements and you should rely more on qualitative. So what that means is you should rely less on numbers and, like you just said, Graeme, more on stories.
Yeah.
Because the way we actually make a judgment about something, whether things are going well or not well, when it comes to humans is, I'm going to use the technical term, is the gestalt of it.
Yeah.
So what that means is we don't look at the parts of the thing. So say, for example, in church, I don't know, like I can't tell, or I want to know if people are actually growing in Christ or in proximity to Christ. You can dissect that to a sense and be like, well, are people doing X, A, B, C, D, E, F, G?
Yeah.
It's like, well, yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting what you hope for.
Yes.
It just means people are doing these things. You actually understand where people are at and what's going on by looking at everything as a whole. And it's actually the parts in and of themselves are worked up into a new whole part, which is, and yes, the technical term, Gestalt, which is, yes, a German term. They love their terms. So, and the only way to do that is by actually getting in the space and actually experiencing what people are experiencing, getting in the, what does Jonathan say? Getting dusty.
Oh, you're getting dusty. I like
dusty.
that. Yeah, no,
It's
it's because it's very human.
It's very human. It's
very
getting
human.
dusty.
It's dusty, and the idea of dusty is not in terms of materialism, but a material world, a physical world.
Yeah.
You live in a physical world, so what's that physical reality? I agree. I mean, I've thought a lot about why we sort of get so fixated on the visual data.
Yeah.
And because decisions, economics are made on this.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Huge
and I
decisions.
think, and I wonder a little bit. We are dominated by an economic metaphor.
Oh, for
sure. Like our news is really the economy, isn't it? Is it up or down? Because we know that if the economy's doing well, then we're probably going to do well. We'll have what we want.
Well, we think we are.
Yeah. So that's the framework that's sort of in our heads, and it keeps coming, because it's in the culture. And so when you're in that economic metaphor, then I think, and you've heard me talk about this before, that so we look for efficiencies.
Yes.
So, how do we get a better economy if we put this here and this here and this here, and we do this and this and this? So it's very linear.
Yeah.
It's very, like, if I do this, I get that. But I think that's not the way in which the world or creation works.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know, when we plant a tree, we can do all the data, we really don't know how much fruit's going to produce. So the world in which we live, our environment, it's not framed in a sort of very cause and effect phenomena.
Yeah.
There is a degree of that.
Yeah.
It's not completely wrong,
No.
but it's not just that. And I think that's the metaphor, the economic metaphor really does load us.
Well, it's dominant, and so this is what, like, I'm still reflecting on our conversation with Andrew Root, is because the economic growth is a stabilizer in our society. And is it the only stabilizer? Well, it's our subjective sense of stability. But we do know that there are other things in society that need to happen, and the economy isn't everything. But because the economy, this is, I think, speaks to the tyranny of metrics, because it's so easy to measure numbers, up and to the right, down and to the left, or down and to the right, because we can measure it so easily, it then becomes our sole focus. And as it becomes our sole focus, we forget about the other things that are actually incredibly important. So an example of this is, I'm trying to find, what I was typing in right now was the article. I have an article talking about the article, so I don't know if this is correct, who wrote this. However, you remember this article being written a month ago in New Zealand, I think it was Stuff magazine or New Zealand Herald or something, I'm probably wrong, about how should churches still have their charitable status?
Oh, yes, and that person,
and the person's an
academic
atheist
in Waikato University, what I think she did, and she set out to go, they should be taxed, and then did a fairly comprehensive piece of research about churches. It came out the other side completely different.
Dr. Juliet Chevalier Watts is her name. There we go. She was just interviewed by by an alumni of Laidlaw. Cool. I'm just looking at it right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, about it, because obviously it's crazy. So so basically that's what she concludes is, why should all these churches get a 33% rebate on their giving? And what's going on with that? Why should they have charitable status? They're just doing their own thing, and many of them are making too much money, and that's the general critique. And then so she looks into it, and what she says is the exact opposite. She says, actually, we don't realize how important churches are. Not just churches, synagogues and mosques are important for the social stability of society. And you can't really measure it. She's like, you can't really measure it. And we've tried, and what we've concluded is that we probably should give them more money, not less. They should get more of a tax break, not less, because now the government doesn't have to spend money on any of this stuff. And churches and mosques and synagogues are way more efficient because they are budgeted and have to stick to a strict budget, and so they're way more efficient in what they're doing.
Yeah, and the ethos of that, I guess, as a social container, a micro social container, as in government is not, it's macro.
Yeah.
Trust is a much more realistic thing for it to happen. Yeah. Because we're closer. So trust in a community means that actually I'll do something for you without I don't. So that it's covenantal, not contractual.
Yeah.
So that covenantal thing works, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have churches. I mean, there is a social contract that exists in a church.
Yeah.
Unwritten social contract, which I think there is.
Yeah.
Which is built on trust. Basically, and you when that social contract, whatever it is, when it's broken, people leave that church.
They do, yeah.
Yeah. So something's broken. It's a social agreement that's unwritten. But in that sort of close proximity of a church community, trust is able to be understood, and there's give and take, there's reciprocity, there's giving and receiving. I mean, the giving and receiving is a very Christian idea. Philippians, give and receive. So I think there's an environment for that to happen.
Yeah.
And that's not always seen, is it?
No,
you apply the economic metaphor.
Yeah.
We're systematizing it, so we can work it all out, and then we can control it. Control might be a bit overstated, but we can. Yeah, we can measure it, and if we can measure it, then we know how it functions, and we can enhance it or whatever.
Yeah.
So that is a question of control, isn't it?
Oh, I think so.
when you think about it. Which raises all sorts of questions about how we see God. I mean, this is a bit prodding that a little bit hard, maybe, but it always fascinates me when I hear people pray, God, I think you're in control. I don't really like that prayer.
I know.
Because I'm going, well, what are we really saying here?
It's like God tapping on the shoulder and being like, I am in control.
It's like,
what do you mean?
well,
Yeah.
I'd rather much
I know
rather
the
think
heart
about
behind it. It's
Yes,
like,
I do.
I'm holding tightly to my life,
and
I would like to loosen that up and surrender to you. I understand the heart of that.
Yeah.
But
You
the
don't want to be too
language-
hard on people, but it's
But
an
it's
interesting.
very secular.
Eh?
It's very secular language of actually I'm the one who's Lord of my life, and then I have to permission God to be Lord of my life.
Yeah.
It's like that is not a pre-modern understanding of the world at all. Yeah.
No, and and even the idea that somehow God's sort of got all these buttons and turning the dials. I think, that's rather simple. I mean, it's God's world. He's sovereign. He holds the world in his hand.
Yeah.
I rest in that. So it's I think that's more of a sort of notion, a posture of rest into.
Yeah.
So metrics, I mean, there is a place for them though, Joey. I mean, if we don't. I mean, take for example, I'm pastoring a church and people are, the numbers are going down. People are leaving. There's something wrong.
Yeah, something's going on.
And then just excuse, maybe, because we don't measure and it's not important. Well, hang on, just look around you. It's like you might be doing something that's not healthy.
No, but here's the thing. This is important, though. That's a really good example to bring up, because this is what Muller, in his book, concludes. He has a series of things that he advocates why you should measure them and how you should measure them. But this is what he says to start it all off. He says, measurement is not an alternative to judgment. Measurement demands judgment. Judgment about whether to measure, what to measure, and how to evaluate the significance of what's being measured, whether rewards and penalties will be attached to the result, and to whom to make the measurements available. So what does he mean by that? In the example you've just presented, okay, say your church attendance is going down. That's a quantifiable measurement that's going down.
Yeah.
And you might be thinking, we must be doing something wrong. Well, no, pause. You might not be doing anything quote-unquote wrong. You need to make judgment upon the measurement. How do you get judgment? It's by actually being in the community, but also being in the world at the same time, and making this Gestaltian judgment. You're seeing the whole. You can't necessarily look at the parts, but you're getting this sense of, okay, I think we're either on the right track, or okay, no, I do feel like something radically has shifted. And you don't get that from within yourself. You get that through being in conversation with others in the community as well, as they give their perceptions. And obviously, as a church, you get that within prayer, and hopefully God speaks to you in some way. So let's use this example. If you were to tell the Orthodox Church, Greek Orthodox, or the Catholic Church, over the past 60 years since Vatican II, actually the reason why so many people are leaving church, and see the numbers, they're just going down and to the right. This is not good. They're leaving church because it's because you're not relevant. The whole hippie movement happened, and you're just so out of touch with reality. No one can understand the Mass at all anymore, so you need to make a change. This is why Vatican II is so controversial, is because in their own Catholic way, Catholics try to be culturally relevant by speaking the noma. What was that phrase they used? Anyway, the vocabulary of the masses, right? The common language within the Mass, and the change how Mass was done to be more approachable. But what people thought they did was they gave up on some really deep liturgical theological values, which they very well may have. However, what's happening now is it's going up and to the right, their attendance. And it's probably not because of Vatican II. Actually, there are a large number of young people who prefer Latin Mass pre-Vatican II Mass.
I know.
So you might be thinking, things are obviously not going right because we're shrinking or we're losing people.
Yeah.
If you were to truly just take a qualitative measurement approach to that, you'd be thinking, well, we must be doing something wrong. But there's more to it than that. See, judgment is always primary over measurement. Personal, embodied, incarnational judgment always wins out over a number every day of the week. But the number informs the measurement, informs the judgment, rather. You know what that reminds me of?
What?
The book we're reading, E. McGilchrist's The Matter with Things.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's his whole argument, left-right hemisphere. Well, in the Master and His Emissary, his book from 2011 or 2009 or something like that.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Where he said, actually, so the left brain can't see the whole. It can't look at the bigger picture, but it does a really good job of analyzing things and breaking them down into their parts. So left brain loves measurements, loves it, loves numbers. Your right brain gets it. Your right brain can understand the whole, can just intuitively move through the world effortlessly and can take in the measurement. So really what we need to do in actually advocating for a judgment primary position over measurement primary position when it comes to measurement is to advocate for more of a right-brained hemisphere looking at the whole approach as opposed to
which is kind of, that's why the importance of narrative becomes important.
Yeah.
So what are the narratives that are bubbling around this? I mean, it's just thinking, like, if you just go on numbers, like, oh, my church is decreasing, and, say that goes to head office. But actually what's going on in the rural town is that, maybe take, for example, let's make the really life, I don't know whether it's true, but if you lived in Tokoroa, and Kinleith, is it Kinleith? The paper mill there closes. That's people losing their jobs. Can't stay in town, got to move on. So there's a lot of factors that are sitting in there that may cause a community to shrink down a bit.
Yeah.
So, urbanisation. So, yeah, but at the same time, so you'd look at that. You'd look at the whole story. That's what you're saying. You'd look at the whole story. But if you're just sending numbers to head office, oh my goodness, that's, yeah. So and that's where it becomes really,
Yeah.
He talks about that in his book. Muller talks about it in his book, doesn't he?
Yeah.
About the kind of questions and then the kind of fudging of numbers. I mean, I have seen that.
Well, that's the thing.
I've seen that
numbers.
too.
Yeah.
Fudging of numbers, because numbers also represent power.
Yes. Oh, for sure.
And so if I have better numbers, then I'm going to look better, and then I'll have more say.
Well, that's the thing. It is,
and that's where I go, this is really problematic.
Well, people think you can't manipulate the numbers. You can't mess with the numbers. You can't tell a different story than the raw data. Yes, you can.
Yeah.
If you ask the wrong
question. Politicians do this all the time.
They
wheel out the numbers to say what they want to say.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Whatever spins the narrative that makes the most sense.
Yeah.
So how do you combat somebody who's fudging the numbers, making it seem like things are better than they really are, or what they've done or the decision that they've made is actually making things better as opposed to making things worse? The only way to actually do that is to do the very thing. The reason why you're advocating for the numbers in the first place is personal judgment. You need to get back to personal judgment, because if you get enough people in the room and enough people asking the questions and enough people who've experienced the thing that has been measured, you're going to be hard pressed to fool a bunch of people.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess, and not to go back to politics, but there is a certain, what we call, elephant in the room with the tariff thing that's going on.
Yeah,
because what you're hearing and we're a long way from that, so we're subject to the media and to what we listen to.
It's true. We're not in the U.S.
No.
We're not in Canada.
But what looks like on the outside is, here you have a Trump, he's telling us, everybody's telling, you are amazing, look what you're doing. And then on the outside, you're going, people, I'm really in trouble, because the stock exchange is going down, economies. So there's a sort of, there's incongruence between people self-talking and telling their own narrative and what's going on the outside. And I always think this is emperor's clothes, The emperor doesn't know he's naked.
No.
And that's, I mean, and that does happen, can happen within church and systems and institutions. It's like almost the middle or the centre becomes encrusted in its own narrative.
Yeah.
And that's why I always think there's a lovely diagram in Roxburgh's book, Heifler, I think is his name, does this figure eight, and then splits the figure eight into I think 6 quadrants.
Yeah.
But what you've got in that sort of middle part, in the middle part of the figure eight turning on its sideways, is what we call the performative zone. Before the formative zone, you have the emergent zone, and then the last sort of segment, which split in two, is the reactive zone. Well, within any church, I think you need to... The performative zone is the institutional part. That everything's functioning, it's good, But where you kind of need to sit is there's always got to be... You always want to be engaging with the margin.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to... Those nails get screwed into... the screws get wound into the coffin, which is a metaphor of death, if we become increasingly institutionalized without listening back to the kind of margins, because margins is where the creativity is.
Yeah, it is.
So, those are all kind of complexities around this measurement thing.
Well, it does. So if we just use the classic example of church growth and up and down, are we doing well or aren't we doing well? How do we know? What's stabilizing us?
Yeah.
So this is where going back to Root's conversation, I really do agree with him. Growth shouldn't be our stabilizer.
No.
So I don't think he's actually made that claim.
No.
I don't think he knows quite where to land with that. I think I'll make the claim for him. Growth should not be our stabilizer as a church. It shouldn't be nothing. It is certainly something, but I don't think it's a good stabilizer. And the more I reflect on it, the more I go back to that Acts 2. Okay, so no matter what's happening in the church, say your church is declining or increasing or the culture shifted, what are the things that the churches really need to be about and that you're all right regardless of the measurements? Are you praying together? Are you meeting together? Are you breaking bread together? Are you under the apostles' teaching, a.k.a. learning and obeying Scripture? Are you encouraging one another? Are you feeding the poor and taking care of the widows in your congregation? I believe there was one other. I think, worshiping and praising together. If those are the things that are happening, so there's the social activism of the church and then the liturgical practices of the church. If those two things are happening, that I'm like, you know what, I think you're okay, because you can't, because love is a part of a community like that. You can't help, but that will lead to what the church is about, regardless of whether you're growing or not. Yeah, and I think what's clear right now, if we to go back to the start of our conversation, what's clear right now is the church is experiencing a quiet revival, first in the UK. But I don't think it's indifferent to. I think it's also happening in Canada. I think it's also happening in Australia. I think it might also be happening in New Zealand. We're noticing people showing up as well at my church, anecdotally speaking.
So there's a real tipping point here, isn't there? Because what we want to do then is go, why is this happening?
Well, how do we make this happen more and more?
Yeah.
We just need to tweak things,
Yeah, so then that becomes, so that at that point, we missed the point.
Yeah, we did.
Because actually, well, I mean, there's a helpful part of that, to see those trends and see what's happening.
Yeah.
That's helpful. But then to sort of move to that a little bit further and say, now if we just do these things, we can, it's like the focus shifts to growth.
Yeah.
Per se, rather than, I mean,
we've
talked about this before with holiness.
Yeah, exactly.
When we objectify that,
yep,
it becomes the God.
Yeah.
It becomes the idol. We can't help ourselves, do we?
No, we can't help ourselves.
We're creatures that want to worship something.
Yeah. So what it tells me, what this measurement conversation kind of tells me is, growth shouldn't be your stabilizer. You actually need to have core convictions about what you're doing or who you are, or institutionally what you're about, regardless of what's happening. And so here's the thing: like, there's a number of Christian institutions in New Zealand that have died during this period of time, and we can look at that and be like, wow, they failed. And it's like, no, calm down. It may be very well that they knew that this would lead in this direction and that they were only going to exist for a time. It's not always a failure to die.
No, and that's a really good point, Joey, because our narrative, our story is one of death to resurrection.
Exactly.
And that's quite a thing in a church. You start a ministry and it goes for a period of time, and then what happens is it institutionalizes, and then it's like becomes a bit of a burden because there's not the people to do it.
Yeah.
And I guess the question is, can we let it die? Is it okay?
Yeah. Something else will come from it.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Yeah.
But we're scared of that.
Yeah.
Because, we've got to keep it going. And then it has a form, but it doesn't have essence anymore. So I think that's quite a, and that's not easy when you're a pastor of a church.
No, or a leader.
Particularly something that's gone for a long time, and you go, it's dying.
That's why I love stories of, and I don't love the stories of the first part, but the second part for sure, of a church that is in slow but consistent decline, that can't pay its bills anymore, has an old, large building, and mostly old building, and is like, all right, what do we do with it now? Do we just sell it to some, condo corporation or whatever? It's like, well, no, or we can gift it to a church plant that is starting up.
Yeah.
Start something new from this.
Yeah.
And still have a legacy of faith, even though this expression...
It takes a group of people of a lot of courage.
Yeah.
And for a congregation, it has to be deeply rooted in that narrative.
Yeah.
That yes, and that's why I really like Andrew Root's. We talked a little bit of Andrew Root's thing about the ministry of consolation.
Yeah.
I thought that was really good, actually.
Yeah, it's really good.
Because it really strikes me, it's out of that despair, that emptiness of human, I can't do anything. We need God.
Yeah.
That's the story.
That is.
He brings out of death to life. That's
Yeah.
the one we walk in. It's quite reassuring, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sure at a practical level, when you're the person, it's right if you're starting the church, but if you're in a dying one,
It's not fun.
No.
But there's always redemption. It's a resurrection story we're a part of.
Yeah. But it takes you to focus on that, to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
so
there we go. I think we got somewhere. Great.
Okay, cool.
They shine a light on our fears. Ooh, so many have been this way before. Heavily hearted and lonesome. We have traveled far from eastern shores to drink from the